This is Carla Hinton reporting for the Oklahoman and NewsOK.com. I'm here in our podcast studio with several people, and then we have author Johnny Carr speaking to us by phone. We're talking today about Orphan Sunday, which is going to take place soon at Council Road Baptist Church in Bethany. And they will have as their guest speaker for that day author Johnny Carr. He has written a book called Orphan Justice, How to Care for Orphans Beyond Adopting. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Carr.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Great, great. Also, we have from Council Road, Reverend James Hunt. He is the church's blended families pastor and also pastor of their Caris Adoption and Foster and Orphan Care Ministry. And then we also have Norman Beheimer, Reverend Norman Beheimer. He is their executive pastor. Thank you all as well.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you.
Good. Well, if you don't mind, I would love to talk to you, Mr. Carr, about orphan justice. I have a few questions, if that's okay. Okay. What is the premise of orphan justice? Why would you say that most orphans do not need to be adopted?
Yeah, that's a great question. The subtitle of the book is actually How to Care for Orphans Beyond Adopting. And, most people, when they hear the word orphan, they immediately think of the solution as adoption. And according to the definition of the statistic that's given for orphans, that's just not true. It's estimated that there are about 153 million orphans in the world. Now, that definition comes from one from UNICEF that says that is a child that's lost one or both parents. So they don't necessarily have lost both of their parents. And this gets really complicated, and we could talk for hours about why that definition is still a good definition, because most of these kids, when they do lose one parent, especially in third world countries, they are extremely vulnerable to the ills of society, and especially the social justice issues that we talk about. And so I wrote the book to really try to educate, especially Christians, because this is a growing movement in churches. And I'm a pastor. I come from a pastoral background. And to talk about, okay, if that's not true, if adoption is not the only solution, what are the other things that we need to be thinking about, and what are these issues that affect lives of orphans on a daily basis?
Okay. Statistics certainly seem to bear that out. You say that everyone can do something. What are some examples of things that others can do that can't adopt, those who can't adopt?
Absolutely. Sponsorship is one of those models that's been around for a long time, and there was just a study done a couple of months ago on the effectiveness of sponsorship. So sponsoring children so that they can stay with their families. Many of these kids, abject poverty is really the reason why they are put out of their families. They just really can't afford to send them to school. They can't afford to feed them. So sponsorship is a good way. Another way, though, is supporting those families who are adopting. Again, as a pastor, and most of the time I speak in churches and speak to church groups, that's one of the things I really want churches to understand, is that even though you may not be a person that adopts a child, you can reach out to those families that are. So, for instance, my family, we have 5 children, 2 born to us and 3 adopted. Our 3 adopted kids are all special needs children. And it's just been wonderful to see how our church community has really come around our family. My children are all 3 deaf. And so seeing people who know sign language step up within our church to say, you know what, if you need a babysitter one night, we'd be happy to do that and help out with the kids because we know how to sign and we can communicate with them. Or our youngest son has a G-tube, and because he was born prematurely and had some other medical issues. And for a nurse to say, you and Beth need a night out. We can babysit one night so that we'll take care of JJ for you, and you don't have to worry about his physical needs because I know how to take care of him and I'm comfortable with that. Just helping families financially adopt. There are just many, many ways that families can get involved that aren't adopting to support those who are, or to get involved in organizations who are doing this work, from rescuing kids from trafficking to getting family care based in other countries instead of orphanages, all types of ways of getting involved, tangibly and financially.
Okay, thank you. I think Reverend Hunt has something to say.
Well, as an adoptive dad, I think I hear what you're saying, Johnny, that really one way to sponsor or give or help those who are adopting would be wrapping around a family that's adopting. To use the terminology, I think Focus on the Family has a program, Wraparound Family. But that's kind of what you're describing with your faith community, your church, wrapping around you. And why is that? Why is that so important for your family? I mean, how has that emotionally helped you, or spiritually recharged you, or even physically?
Yeah, adopting children with special needs is really exhausting sometimes. And so for us to know that our church is going to be there for us, and I'll be honest, there are a lot of families that have children with special needs, whether they were adopted or born to them, that really feel like they're a burden to the church, because they know if they go to church and they leave that child in the nursery, that church is already struggling to find helpers and those types of things. And here they are coming to this child who's going to need some one-on-one help or some one-on-one care. And honestly, there are even those churches who kind of turn a blind eye to that, and they don't reach out and help them. And so for the church to revisit this whole issue of children with special needs and begin to say to the community that, no, you're not a burden to our church, you're a blessing to our church. And we want you to come here. We want you to know that your child is going to be taken care of. And mom and dad, you're going to sit in that worship service, and you're just going to, as you said, get charged spiritually, because you're going to know that your children are taken care of. This is your time to be ministered to, because you're ministering to these kids all through the week.
Okay, great. What are some of the blind spots the church has regarding vulnerable children, would you say?
Yeah, I think the vulnerable children are the blind spot.
Okay.
Most of our pastors don't know any of the statistics. Most do not know how many children are waiting to be adopted in their own county or their own state. It is really shocking to me, and it shouldn't be, because I was the same way 7 years ago before we adopted and before I got involved in all of this. I was that pastor who didn't know anything about any of this. So I'm really talking about myself. I'm not trying to be critical of others. But that is the blind spot. We don't know. We don't know that right there in our own community are children in the foster care system that the judge has already terminated the rights of their birth parents. They can never go back to their birth parents. They need to be adopted. But they're not healthy little infant babies. These are children that are 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, that have been through trauma and abuse and neglect, and many do have physical disabilities as well. And these children are waiting for families. Over 100,000 of those kids today in the United States are waiting to be adopted on a daily basis. There is no shortage of children. There's a shortage of families who are willing to adopt children with these medical and special needs.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Orphan Sunday. I know that Orphan Sunday is going to be celebrated at Council Road Baptist Church on November 3rd, but this is not an isolated observance, is it?
No, absolutely not. The Christian Alliance for Orphans was formed about 10 years ago, and they established the first Sunday of November as kind of a national Orphan Sunday. And as a matter of fact, it's international now. But many churches can't do it on the first Sunday of November for whatever reason, and honestly, it doesn't matter. What we're trying to do is to get churches to think, can we at least take one Sunday a year, whether it's in January or July or November, and say we want to preach and teach on what the Bible has to say about caring for orphans, and then share some of these statistics with our congregation and educate them. And then what we see happen from that Sunday is we see these ministries will actually begin to form and grow, where this actually begins to take place on a weekly basis, where the church has teaching on a weekly basis, or evangelism and outreach and ministry. Well, orphan ministry becomes part of the weekly ministry of the church through these ministries. But many of them are born out of these Orphan Sundays, where from the pulpit, the pastor takes time to preach and teach on these issues.
This question is opened up to Reverend Hunt and Reverend Beheimer. Why is Orphan Sunday something that is important to Council Road Baptist?
I'd love to hear your perspective, Norm.
Well, I think what I see happening is, without even noticing it, I've found couples that were adopting. In fact, we've had one couple in our church that's been a member of the church almost as long as I've been there, and they have fostered over 40 children, if I'm not mistaken. And these over 50. And he's been a part of our church, and I love John. I just never knew really what all that they were about. And then I see these other couples, and then I hear Wes Lane say something in a meeting and about adoption. And my eyes just started really getting open to the fact. Well, then a staff member in our church adopted one. Well, another staff member in our church adopted one. Okay. And then one of the same staff members adopted 3 more. And I kept wondering, and then I hear my own family thinking that adoption, in fact, almost like what Johnny was saying there for a moment, was when my eldest son was dating his wife-to-be, she always wanted to adopt, and my son was just so, no, that is not going to happen. And he went on a business trip to Haiti a couple years ago, and if he could have put this little girl in his luggage and brought her home, there's the most adorable picture, and his heart was just dramatically changed. And I think, honestly, I appreciate what Johnny has to say. Adoption wasn't really part of my growing up, and so I never really heard much about it. And my heart kind of aches. I kind of feel like I've missed out on something, but I'm so glad to hear Johnny talk about ways that you can be involved, because I'll guarantee when my family adopts their 2 that are coming, my wife and I will be there to not only as personal family, but our church family will be there. We have a lot of people in our church, Carla, that are adopting, and it's, in fact, I'll tell you an interesting thing that blew me away. Last year, I do training for deacons, and in my training, I had 3 deacons that I was taking through a year training, all different ages, and one of them was a grandpa that was having his child adopt, and the other 2 had adopted. So the 3 men that I'm training for 1 year have adopted families, and I thought, this is just something that I need to see differently. So I'm kind of late to the game, if that's to say, and I don't want to be out of the game. I want to be able to help however I can, and I'm almost living my life vicariously through some other people, I think. So that's honestly the truth.
For me, Orphan Sunday is a celebration of the Father's heart for orphans and an encouragement to the church to respond correctly. So when I say the Father, I'm talking about obviously the Father in heaven. The Bible says he's a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy habitation. In the law, in the Old Testament law, the first 5 books, you'll see time and again God build into the old covenant laws of justice on how to deal with orphans and widows and strangers and folks who are vulnerable. And so it was written into the law code. The justice code is there all throughout the Pentateuch. And then the prophets come along and they chastise God's old covenant people, and time and again, part of that chastisement is, do you not remember the justice code of the law? You have forsaken that. And because you have, God has forsaken you, and judgment's coming. And so then you enter into the new covenant, and you see Jesus coming. His first sermon, he alludes back to Isaiah, and he says that he came to proclaim release to the captives and basically joy to the vulnerable. He's there to set them free and to take care of them. And then he sits down, closes the scroll. He says, today this has been fulfilled in your hearing. And so he sets the tone for those who will follow him, that we are to, built on the foundation of the Old Testament, we are to now, as new covenant followers of Jesus, pick up the mantle that he started and move forward in his name and love those who are vulnerable. Bring them the proverbial cup of water when they need it, and the food, or in this case, families. Bring them into your families and love them as your son and your daughter. Our tagline for the Charis ministry at our church is changing orphans to sons and daughters, and that has to do with labels. If you label someone, you can do all sorts of things with that person, including setting them aside or putting them into statistics. But when you change an orphan to a son or daughter, that is now my son, that is now my daughter, and that changes the entire dynamic on how you think about that child and how everybody else thinks about that child. Because they're a son, they belong. They're a daughter, they belong. So Orphan Sunday is a celebration of what the Father in heaven has done for spiritual orphans. He sent Jesus to rescue them. And then he calls us to do the same for physical orphans as his followers. And so really it's a celebration of God, and it's an enablement, I don't know, maybe a big banner for a day to highlight the need and the opportunity, really, for God's people to engage.
And I do think that the banner is a good word. I also think just a flat-out education. I think, if I'm not mistaken, and James, you'll know this better than I, if every church in Oklahoma were to adopt a child from the DHS system, there would be no more orphans in Oklahoma.
It wouldn't even take every church. It wouldn't even take. There's right now available. There's 300 and some kids that are immediately available for adoption. Okay, in Oklahoma, and most of those are older kids. Now there's over 10,500. Latest I heard, over 10,500 kids in state's care. Okay, but the majority of those are have a permanency goal of reunification with their families or something else, but it's not yet been changed to a permanency goal of adoption. So there's some technical language there. But there's 300 plus that are available. Matter of fact, there's a Focus on the Family event coming to Crossings Community Church on October 26th, 10 to 2, little plug here, called Wait No More. It has nothing to do with denomination or anything. It has everything to do with mobilizing God's church to provide those adoptive homes for that 300 plus number, those kids, that are currently available in the state. So that'd be something to maybe look into for folks interested.
Okay, good. Well, thank you all so much for coming today and sharing this information. Thank you, Reverend Carr, as well, for joining the conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, all right.
Johnny, I look forward to seeing you and meeting you at Council Road on November the 3rd. I really am looking forward to that.
You too, Norman.
See you later, buddy.
Thanks,
Good talking to you.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. This is Carla Hinton reporting for the Oklahoman and NewsOK.com. For more information, read the Oklahoman.